in Las Vegas in just a second here. But before we do that, let me remind you and mention that the jury is still out deliberating in the Lawrence trial. There's the old clock there going for you. I don't know. It's Friday. It's kind of an interesting case, but are they going to have a Friday verdict? I don't know. But the clock is ticking away. So as we head to Las Vegas, this is the trial of former elected official Robert Tellis, the defendant accused of killing investigative reporter Jeffrey Gehrman for writing articles that were damaging to the defendant's political career when he was in office. Gehrman wrote about Tellis' hostile work environment. He wrote about an alleged affair with somebody at the office there. And the prosecutors believe that Tellis was motivated by those articles to kill Gehrman because he lost his re-election bid after the very first article was published. Gehrman was found stabbed to death outside his home back in September of 2022, 69 years old at the time. However, the defense says that their client is being framed, and because of Gehrman's job, he had lots of enemies that were against him, and the defendant has pleaded not guilty. So, if convicted, Tellis could face life in prison. Let's go into court now in Las Vegas. Brand new witness just taking the stand.
Thank you. So for the interior left side?
The interior side of the, excuse me, left gray shoe.
And that's lab item 13?
That is lab item 13.
Okay. That was negative presumptive blood.
Okay. And what about from the bottom of that left gray shoe?
That was also negative presumptive for blood.
Okay. You also received a swab from the interior side of a partial right gray shoe?
Yes.
And also pieces, I'm going to put on the overhead now, states 274. What was identified to you as pieces of black, white, and gray rubber?
Yes.
With regard to, let's go back to the partial right gray shoe, what was that in terms of whether it was presumptive for blood or not?
The swab from the partial right shoe was the positive presumptive for blood.
And then putting again states 274, with regard to the pieces of black, white, and gray rubber, what was the presumptive, what did the presumptive test tell you?
Positive presumptive for blood.
Okay. In addition, you swabbed some scissors, is that, or you received swabs from scissors?
I received swabs from scissors.
I got to get that straight. How were the scissors described to you, or well, they were identified, I guess, the swabs as AB5 and AB6, is that fair?
Yes, specifically from the handle of the scissors.
Okay. I'm going to put on the overhead what's been admitted as states 259. And I think we can see there's a evidence marker there that says AB5. And then this is states 261, which also has a marker of AB6. With regard to those two swabs that you received, can you tell me whether or not they were positive presumptive for blood?
Both swabs for AB5 and AB6 were positive presumptive for blood.
Okay. And then you were asked to do a presumptive test on an interior blade of a Husky folding knife. I'm putting on the overhead states 256. What was your finding whether or not the knife was positive?
The knife was negative presumptive, or the knife swab that I received was negative presumptive for blood.
Okay. And so the scissors were positive, but just to be clear, the knife itself was negative.
The swab I received, yes, was negative.
Okay. You also received items or from a hat. This is states 285.
Those I did physically receive. So I physically received the hat pieces.
Okay, so you would have done the swabbing on those?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and I assume, well, actually I should ask you, how do you do the swabbing on that type of item?
So this item was impounded differently than how this photo shows. So the items that I received all of them in a large box where each individual hat piece, as you see on the screen, was in its own individual brown paper bag. Per our policy, we do not have lab items opened at the same time. So with the approval from DNA management, because we didn't know where the interior lining of the hat would be, I had approval to swab the lining of each piece with one swab. So the way that looked, to keep with our procedures of not having multiple items opened at once, was I had clean butcher paper down, I was in my PPE, and I would open up one item. I would examine it to determine if there's any possible staining or to see if it had that interior lining that we were looking for. And then I would swab that with a clean swab, and that would go into a clean label tube. That hat piece would then be put away, the area would be cleaned, and another hat piece would be opened up to determine if there was a lining there. There was only 2 hat pieces that had lining, so the only 2 of them were swabbed with the same swab, and that went into one tube.
Okay, and with regard to the hat, did you do that presumptive test for blood?
On certain stains that I noted, but not on the swab itself.
Okay, and with the stains that you did do, what were the findings?
Those stains were negative presumptive for blood.
Okay. Now, you did additional work on other items of evidence, is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay, and many of those items, or several of them, were swabs taken from a vehicle?
That's correct.
Okay, and so that's the same thing where obviously you don't have the car in front of you, you got swabs or like Q-tips of what was done by a crime scene analyst?
That's correct.
Okay, and did you also get or examine clothing that was collected?
Yes.
And I'm going to put on the overhead states 166. And did that clothing include Sperry shoes, like a right shoe and a left shoe?
Yes.
And did it also include a shirt and shorts?
Yes.
Okay. And then you also received swabs taken from the crime scene or identified to you as taken from a crime scene?
That's correct, yes.
I'm putting on the overhead states 149. Now the swabs that you worked samples on with regard to those items, were they labeled to you as AB3, AB4, and AB5?
Yes, they were.
Okay, and they were identified as being taken from AB3 is a bush, AB4 is a bush, and AB5 is a butterfly?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I want to kind of go back on these a little bit. The swabs that were all taken from the car, were any of those presumptive for blood?
They were all negative presumptive for blood.
Okay. Now, with regard to the Sperry shoes, what were the findings with regard to whether they were positive or negative for blood?
I identified several stains on the shoes, and of the stains I tested, they were positive presumptive for blood.
Okay. What about the T-shirt?
The T-shirt, also of the stains that I identified, were positive presumptive for blood.
And what about the shorts?
As well as the shorts, the stains that I identified were positive presumptive for blood.
Okay. I want to go back to states 149. These swabs that were taken from AB3, 4, and 5, which are the bush, and the butterfly, what were your findings with regard to whether they were positive presumptive for blood?
The 2 swabs from the bush, AB3 and AB4, were positive presumptive for blood, and the swab from the butterfly, AB5, was negative presumptive for blood.
Okay. And so on that one item, AB5, that, to be clear, that butterfly, which is like a lawn decoration, that one is negative, but the ones from the bushes were positive?
That's correct.
Okay. So after you completed that presumptive testing, I assume not obviously all at the same time, but all of the items that we've been discussing, you put in test tubes and went through the normal DNA processing?
That's correct.
And then once that processing was done, does another analyst from Metro look at the data in the job that you're currently a trainee for, and does that person analyze the data?
Yes, she does.
Was there any discrepancy or anything unusual in the testing process that occurred when you were analyzing these items?
No, not to my knowledge.
If anything, if you were to see something happen with like a reagent or something like that, does Metro policy and probably lab policy require you to take note of it?
Yes, and depending on it, we will also document it. And if anything is not caught, it will also be in our review documents. That's available in the case file.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll pass this.
Yes, thank you. And we'll start with the end of your testimony and work towards the beginning. In reference to the items of clothing recovered from Mr. Gehrman, you had testified that the shoes were tested, presumptive test for blood in both shoes. That topsiders were both positive for blood.
Yes. Do you mean, sorry, Mr. Gehrman's shoes?
Yes,
The ones I
Mr. Gehrman's
physically,
shoes.
yes, yes.
And the shirt that was worn by Mr. Gehrman, presumptive test, blood.
Yes.
Same thing with the shorts. Presumptive blood test, positive for blood.
Yes.
In reference to the bushes, it was specifically AB4, AB3, again, presumptive positive blood.
Yes.
And that would have been the area based upon the diagram surrounding Mr. Gehrman's body.
To my knowledge, yes.
Let's turn your attention now to the vehicle. You were called upon to conduct presumptive tests for blood.
Yes.
It was a subject vehicle. Do you know the type, the make, or just that it was from a vehicle?
It usually just says V1 or Vehicle 1 when describing the vehicle.
And just so we're clear, the swabs that you received and tested presumptively for blood were negative.
That's correct, yes.
The straw hat, the multiple pieces, you tested presumptively negative for blood.
The stains that I located were presumptive negative for blood, yes.
Were those swabs also taken in order to test later for DNA?
No. For the sampling process, due to only looking for possible trace DNA, the staining was just in case if I saw anything, and due to them being negative presumptive, I did not take them forward. However, the stains are still available if you would like them to be tested.
So just so we're clear, then the hat was not tested for DNA.
The hat lining was tested, but it was not tested for, well, it was tested. The stains that I noted were tested for possible blood.
Okay, but nothing more.
Besides the possible trace DNA, nothing more.
Okay. And again, we're talking about the lining versus the exterior. The lining was obviously tested for DNA.
Yes, the exterior was not.
Okay. Was it, and nothing was found as far as DNA concerning the interior, the band of the hat? Or there was, but it was very weak?
The findings of the DNA would be better explained by the forensic scientist who interpreted the results.
Fair enough. As to the knife, presumptive negative, correct?
That's correct.
Now the scissors, handle was presumptive positive.
Yes, for both of the swabs.
But as far as the blades, the cutting part?
I did not receive the cutting part of the scissors, so I am unable to say.
In reference to the shoes, the left gray shoe, presumptive negative.
You mean the shoe pieces?
The shoe pieces.
I'm sorry, can you please say which lab item it is?
Yes. In order for just easy to work, you tested two shoes, correct? The gray
Yes.
shoes.
Yes.
One shoe was whole, the other was cut to pieces.
Yes, one pair of shoes I physically received, the other pair of shoes or shoe pieces I only received swabs from.
Okay. If you could narrow down your testimony concerning the shoe pieces.
Okay, yes.
Presumptive positive?
Some were not. So 2 of the pieces of the shoe were negative presumptive for blood, and 2 of the pieces of the shoe were positive presumptive for blood.
Can you tell the court what other substances other than blood may create or cause a presumptive positive?
There could be rust. Rust is also known. There are false positives in cases of, I wouldn't say false positives because it's still blood, but animal blood can also be positive but will produce no DNA results due to us having a human-specific DNA testing kit, but they can still show presumptive positive blood.
And in reference to these findings, we can't necessarily date whether that rust or animal blood or perhaps human blood had been there, correct?
That's correct.
Now, as to the other shoe, the whole shoe, presumptive negative.
Mr. Gehrman's shoe?
No, we're talking about, we already addressed Mr. Gehrman's shoes, the Perry topsiders.
I've only received, the naming that I have doesn't say which shoe is whole. I apologize. It says swab from interior side of left gray shoe. Is that the one that
Correct.
Okay, both of those for the interior left side of the gray shoe and the swab from the bottom of the left gray shoe were both negative presumptive for blood.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Just briefly, I just wanted to ask a couple clarifying questions about the hat.
The hat and hat pieces There's two parts of it, as I understand your testing. The first is you swab the lining of the hat to maybe get a wearer profile if you could.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then there was staining on the outside that you thought possibly could be blood, but when you tested it, it was negative, presumptive for blood?
That's correct, yes.
And so the outside that was negative, presumptive for blood, that wasn't moved forward for additional DNA testing, is that fair?
That's correct. And the stains are still available on the hat for additional testing if necessary.
Okay, but the wearer profile that maybe you'd get from the lining, that was further tested for DNA?
Yes, the swabbing taken from the inner lining was taken forward for lab processing.
Thank you. I have nothing else, Your Honor.
Class?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony here today. You may step down and you are excused from your subpoena. Thank you for being here. And the state may call the next witness.
Okay, so the second forensic scientist to queue up and testify for this jury in the Telus case, and interesting mixed bag of what was found, what wasn't found. Some items from the defendant having blood-like stains that turned out not to be blood, but that same hat went further for DNA testing, and we believe will show that it has the defendant's DNA in it. Also the shoes. I got to get into the shoes with my guest here. Michael Korbanix is here. He joins us, criminal defense attorney. He is on set. Catherine Lizardo still with us. Good to have you again. So, Mike, let me ask you this. I've got shoes that I've worn out, shoes that maybe I just got tired of wearing. Never did cut them up with the scissors, though. Never did that. What do you make of that, which they're obviously alleging the defendant did to his shoes, or at least one of his shoes?
Well, that's a very bizarre thing, as you said, because jurors are going to look at almost all the evidence as to what is normal and what seems like something a normal person would do. And things change when you put the surrounding circumstances around it. So you would be saying, why would somebody cut their shoe off and cut them up, and they're suspected in this sort of case? So this is another contributing factor that will only help the state in their proof to reach the proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, and some of those pieces had some blood on them, by the way. Oops. So I don't know why you'd be cutting your shoes up, and that's also, I can't imagine that's very easy to do, to actually just take scissors and cut a shoe up. So we'll see where this all goes. By the way, you may have noticed that in the Susan Lawrence case, the jury verdict clock there has frozen at 1. There's a 50-50 chance I broke something, but in this case, they got a question. So we will share that with you. That's the case, of course, out of Florida, the self-defense case where Ms. Lawrence shot and killed her neighbor through the door. So when we get an update on that, we'll pass it along. But a quick break, then back to Telus right after this.